Cologne Cathedral is one of the most majestic churches in Europe. Gothic architecture, towers, stone, beauty that makes tourists freeze with their mouths open. But behind this beauty stretches such a dark story that official guidebooks prefer to speak about it dryly and cautiously. Because if you dig deeper, an unpleasant question appears. What if this cathedral was not left unfinished by accident? They tell us, wars, lack of money, changing eras, epidemics, the complexity of construction. It all sounds reasonable. But then why have legends about the architect's deal with the devil surrounded Cologne Cathedral for centuries? Why was the final stone linked to the apocalypse? Why do people remember a strange underground channel near the church? And why do some still speak of the white shadow of the architect as if it guards its stone creation? Coincidence? Superstition? A beautiful urban horror story for tourists? Or are we looking at one of those stories where the official version too neatly covers up the uncomfortable details? Today, we will examine the history of Cologne Cathedral not as an ordinary tour, but as a dark investigation. Watch until the end, because you will find out why one of the most beautiful cathedrals in Europe may be not just a church, but a stone warning, and why its story still sounds as if placing the final point in it could be dangerous. Cologne Cathedral should have become Europe's completed stone crown long ago. Instead, it turned into the most stubborn architectural question, one that people have failed to answer honestly for centuries. One of the most famous Gothic monuments was first started back in the 13th century, yet a strange trace of incompletion still clings to it. It is far too convenient to blame everything only on money, wars, and changing rulers. This cathedral survived kings, bishops, empires, brutal eras, and loud promises. People changed, authorities changed, plans changed, but the story itself seemed to crash into an invisible wall. Why did a building meant to become a triumph of faith and human skill remain an open wound on the face of the city for so long? And why did new obstacles appear every time the end seemed close? This refers to the central mystery of Cologne Cathedral. Its history does not look like an ordinary construction project, but like a prolonged confrontation. On one side stood craftsmen, stonecutters, architects, church authorities, and citizens. On the other side stood the disturbing feeling that someone, or something, would not allow the final point to be placed. The official explanations sound calm. There was not enough money, eras changed, Europe went through difficult times. But can that alone explain the centuries-long delay around a structure that was considered a matter of honor for an entire city? This is where the unpleasant, almost insolent thought begins. Perhaps Cologne Cathedral was not stopped by people alone. Perhaps from the very beginning, something hung over this construction site that went beyond ordinary human understanding. In the year 1248, Cologne placed its bet on stone, height, and loud glory. The first stone in the foundation of the future cathedral was laid by Bishop Conrad von Hochstaden, and this was not just a religious gesture. It was the city's claim to greatness, superiority, and a place among the major centers of Europe. Cologne did not want a modest church, but a structure before which other cities would fall silent. The townspeople asked for the cathedral, the authorities supported the plan, and the church gave it a sacred meaning. Everything looked confident, almost victorious. There was desire, there was a bishop, there was a foundation, and there was a grand goal. The new cathedral was supposed to overshadow its neighbors with beauty and become stone proof of Cologne's power. But this is exactly where history's bitter mockery begins. They dreamed of quick deadlines and received a construction story stretched across centuries. This refers to the first historical blow against the beautiful myth of human control. People thought they could command time, craftsmen, and stone. They were certain that an order, money, and ambition would be enough. But from the very beginning, the the cathedral seemed to show that it would live by its own rules. The plans were bold, almost defiant. Build quickly, build higher, build more beautifully, build in such a way that Europe would talk. Does this not sound like dangerous human pride? The city wanted to raise a stone miracle toward the sky, but it could not know that this plan would become not only a symbol of faith, but also a symbol of centuries-long stubbornness, anxiety, and strange incompletion. Cologne found the model for its future stone giant not at home, but in France. Amiens Cathedral became the challenge the city wanted to answer in its own way. Higher, stronger, more solemn. Gerhard von Rile was appointed as the chief architect, and from the beginning he was given not an ordinary construction project, but an almost reckless task. He had to raise a cathedral that would not merely receive people, but crush the imagination with its scale. But behind this decision stood more than architectural envy and civic pride. According to legend, even before the first stone was laid, Archbishop Eustorgius brought the relics of the Magi from Milan to Cologne. And at this point, an ordinary building story suddenly turns into a story of attraction, faith, and a huge stream of people. Because a relic of such rank does not sit quietly in a corner. People go to it, speak about it, and cross roads and borders for it. This refers to the main reason Cologne needed not a modest church, but a gigantic structure. The city received a sacred relic, and with it came pilgrims, expectations, pressure, and a new role on the map of Europe. The old walls could no longer hold everyone who wanted to come. So the city needed a cathedral that looked as if stone itself had obeyed a sacred command. Pilgrims did not come merely to look at beautiful towers. They came to relics before which people were expected to bow, pray, ask, and hope. And Cologne understood one thing. If the city wanted to hold on to this glory, it needed a cathedral capable of becoming not a local church, but a European magnet. In this way, religious devotion, civic ambition, and cold calculation merged into one project that was too large from the very beginning to unfold peacefully. It was at the drawing stage that the story of Cologne Cathedral gave its first disturbing crack. Gerhard von Rile was ordered to create the design for the future cathedral, but the great idea suddenly hit a dead wall. For a whole year, the architect struggled with the plan that was supposed to become Cologne's pride. And what happened? The sheets remained stubborn, the lines refused to come together, and the cathedral seemed unwilling to be born on paper. For the city, this was almost humiliating. The ambitions were already there, the sacred relic was already there, the stream of pilgrims was already there, and Cologne already wanted to challenge all of Europe. But the chief architect could not give the authorities the one thing without which the stonecutters were powerless: the final drawing. Is it not strange that the man trusted with the greatest cathedral suddenly found himself trapped before a blank page? This refers to the first sign that something unpleasant was thickening around the future cathedral. The construction had not yet begun in full force, the towers had not yet risen above the city, and anxiety had already entered the story. No walls had collapsed, no money had vanished, no enemies had interfered. The failure happened exactly where everything should have been clear, inside the architect's mind. And this is where the dry chronicle begins to smell of sulfur and fear. Because an ordinary delay could have been explained by exhaustion, by the difficulty of the project, or by pressure from the authorities. But the legend stubbornly points to another conclusion, as if someone deliberately prevented Gerhard from seeing the future cathedral as a whole. Too large a church, too loud a glory, too daring a dream, and too strange an emptiness where the plan was supposed to appear. One day, Gerhard von Rile stepped out into the streets of Cologne, not as a victor, but as a man cornered by his own helplessness. The city was waiting for a plan from him, the church was waiting for greatness, the townspeople were waiting for a stone miracle, and the architect still did not have the drawing everyone demanded. People may speak as much as they want about inspiration, skill, and a holy mission, but the truth looked much harsher. The chief master was failing, and at that very moment, fate placed before him a meeting from which any cautious man should have stepped away. The streets of Cologne that day seemed to become a stage for a dangerous coincidence. Among ordinary city movement, among stone walls, market stalls, passers-by, and dull street noise, he noticed a stranger. The man did not shout, did not call, did not beg for attention. He simply stood or sat aside and calmly drew lines on paper, as if he had done it many times before, as if he had already seen the entire cathedral, from its foundation to its sharpest towers. This refers to the most suspicious moment of the legend. The right man appeared exactly when Gerhard was on the edge of failure. Not earlier, not later, not in the workshop, not before the city council, but right there on the street, almost openly. Does an ordinary accident look like this? Or had a bait been placed before the architect? Too precise, too desired, too dangerous. Gerhard came closer. One glance over the stranger's shoulder, and all his former confidence must have fallen into a cold emptiness. On the stranger's sheet, there was no rough sketch, no beginner's attempt, no random fantasy. There appeared the exact plan he himself had failed to create for a whole year. The lines formed the future cathedral so convincingly that the paper seemed to know what stone did not yet know. Here the story becomes especially unpleasant. The architect did not merely see a beautiful drawing. He saw the answer to his humiliation, the solution to his torment, the key to the glory the city demanded at once. And what was a man supposed to feel after struggling with a design for a year, only to find it almost finished in the hands of an unknown figure? Admiration, envy, fear, or all of them at once, because such a gift never comes for free. This refers to the moment when human ambition begins to argue with caution. Gerhard could have walked away, could have remained silent, could have decided that the coincidence before him was too strange. But in front of him lay the design of the future cathedral, his chance, his rescue, his possible immortal name in stone. And would a proud master easily turn away from the drawing the whole city seemed to demand from him with pressure and impatience? The stranger looked far too calm. In legends like this, danger rarely arrives with noise and threats. It arrives politely, almost businesslike, with the right paper at the right hour. And this man, whatever he may have looked like from the outside, held in his hands not merely a sheet. He held power over Gerhard's future, over Cologne's ambition, and over the dark knot that people would later call the mystery of the cathedral. Gerhard understood the main thing. Before him was the plan that could open the way to construction. Not a vague idea, not a dream, not a misty outline, but a real design for the future church. The very church that was meant to receive pilgrims, overshadow other cities, and lift Cologne above its rivals. But with that understanding came a cold question. Who could create the drawing that would not come to the appointed architect? And why did this unknown man appear exactly when despair had become stronger than common sense? Gerhard von Rile could no longer simply walk away. Before him lay the drawing he had been chasing for a whole year, and that sheet did not smell like paper, but like power. The mysterious man held in his hands the one thing that could save the architect from disgrace and turn his name into a stone legend. And then a bargain began, the kind that should have sent a chill through even the most self-assured master. Gerhard started persuading the stranger to sell him the plan. Not to ask for advice, not to admit his own failure, not to step aside, but to buy another man's solution. Here it is, the naked truth of human ambition. When glory stands before your eyes, conscience begins to speak more quietly. The architect needed the drawing, the city demanded results, The church expected greatness, and at that moment, the price seemed to lose its meaning. This refers to the most dangerous point in the entire story. The great cathedral had not yet risen above Cologne, but the deal around it was already suspicious. A sacred place cannot be built on fear, deception, and a desperate wish to win at any cost. But Gerhard was apparently too close to his dream to hear that inner warning. He saw not a threat, but salvation. The stranger agreed. Too quickly? Too calmly? Of course. It was as if he had been waiting for exactly this. But instead of gold, titles, or honors, he named a price that instantly darkened the whole story. He demanded the architect's soul. Not money, not gratitude, not a place in city chronicles, but the soul of a man who wanted to become famous through stone and height. And here the mask finally falls. The man is no random master, no strange draftsman, no brilliant passerby. According to the legend, standing before Gerhard was the devil himself, the eternal buyer of human pride, who comes not when a person is weak in body, but when he is blinded by the desire to become great. This refers to the brutal meaning of the bargain. The devil did not simply need a cathedral, he needed a crack inside a man. He found the architect at the moment of failure, gave him what he had dreamed of, and then calmly presented the bill. And that bill was written not in ink, but in fear. But then the price became even more monstrous. According to the legend, the devil not only offered the drawing, but also promised to build the cathedral in 3 years. Imagine that daring bait. What people might drag on for centuries, he promised to complete almost instantly. For the city, it would have been a miracle. For the architect, immortal glory. For the legend, direct proof that something unclean had been present in this construction from the very beginning. Only this miracle required a new payment. Not only Gerhard's own soul, the devil also demanded the souls of his wife and child. This is where the story stops being merely dark and becomes almost unbearably harsh. The architect was offered greatness not only at the cost of his own fate, but at the cost of those closest to him. Can there be a more terrible price for a drawing? One sheet of paper, several lines, future towers, promised glory, and beside it, a family placed on the edge of the abyss. This is no longer a conversation about skill, and no longer an argument about construction deadlines. This is a bargain in which human pride collides with the dirtiest temptation. To receive everything at once and pay with what one has no right to give away. This refers to the central conflict of the legend of Cologne Cathedral. A church meant to become a symbol of faith becomes tied to an offer that smells of betrayal. The stone has not yet risen. The stained glass has not yet shone. The towers have not yet cut into the sky. And yet, a terrible secret already seems to lie in the foundation of future greatness. And if this legend preserves even half the spirit of that time, the question sounds merciless. How much human darkness can hide behind the facade of the most beautiful cathedral? Gerhard von Rile agreed to the bargain because he was certain the devil would fail. What arrogance! The architect decided he had outplayed the dark force itself, as if the figure before him were not a dangerous tempter, but an ordinary contractor with loud promises. He looked at the impossible deadline and probably calmed himself with one thought. Such a cathedral could not be built in 3 years, so the price would remain an empty threat. But very soon, that confidence began to crack. The stone rose too quickly, the walls climbed too confidently, and the future cathedral seemed to break out of the ground not by human hands, but by some alien, furious will. What was supposed to prove Gerhard's victory began turning into his nightmare. Every new row of masonry struck him harder than any accusation. The bargain was not a joke, but a sentence approaching together with the towers. This refers to the most poisonous moment of the legend. A man thinks he is buying glory, but in truth he is buying fear. At first he rejoices at the escape he has found, Then he begins counting the days, and then he can no longer look calmly at his own creation. The cathedral that was meant to exalt his name began rising before him as a reminder of the price he had promised to pay. Gerhard changed before everyone's eyes. Yesterday he may have looked like a master who had finally received the long-awaited plan, but now he more often seemed like a man hearing the footsteps of an invisible creditor behind him. His anxiety could not remain secret for long. A home sees what a city does not notice. Loved ones hear silence louder than words. And the architect's wife, of course, noticed that something terrible was happening to her husband. She began questioning him. Not out of idle curiosity, not for empty family drama, but because the man beside her seemed to be eaten from within by his own secret. Gerhard could avoid answering, could blame exhaustion, work, the pressure of the city, the burden of construction. But can horror be hidden for long when that horror grows outside the windows every day in the form of a stone giant? This refers to the turn where the legend becomes not only a story about a cathedral, but a story about a family dragged into someone else's pride. The architect made the bargain himself, but according to the terms of the dark deal, those who had never signed this madness were supposed to pay as well. That is why the confession to his wife sounds especially heavy. He is not merely telling her about his mistake, he is revealing that he placed those closest to him on the edge of the abyss. In the end, Gerhard could not endure it. He confessed. And that scene may have been more frightening than any night vision. Not the devil at the gate, not towers in the dark, not stones falling from above, but a quiet family conversation after which the old life was no longer possible. His wife heard that the drawing had been bought not with money, but with the promise of a soul. And worse still, she and the child had been pulled into the terrible price. One can imagine what cold fury must have risen inside that woman. She had not been asked, she had not been warned, and her fate had been used for the sake of a cathedral, glory, and male self-confidence. But instead of collapsing under fear, she began to think. And here the legend makes her not a victim, but the only person still capable of acting soberly. This refers to the strongest female move in this story. Where the architect first boasted in his calculation and then trembled before the consequences, his wife began looking for a way out. Not in cathedral drawings, not among city authorities, not among stonecutters, but inside the very condition of the bargain. If the devil tied everything to a deadline, then the deadline could be broken. If he waited for a morning sign, then that sign could be faked. She searched for the weak point, not in the devil's power, but in his arrogance, and she found it. In the legend, it is Gerhard's wife who becomes the one who sees a simple and daring possibility. To deceive the one who was used to deceiving people. Not with force, not with prayer, not with a sword, but with cunning. And so, in the story of Cologne Cathedral, a new sharp turn appears. Against the dark bargain stands the woman who had been dragged into it without a voice. According to the bargain, the devil had to finish the construction before the rooster crowed for the first time at the beginning of the 4th year. There it was, the merciless deadline around which the entire terrifying game was twisted. Not years, not centuries, not endless church promises, but one bird's cry, one morning sound, one thin border between rescue and payment. And does this detail not look like cruel mockery? The fate of the architect, his wife, his child, and the great cathedral was tied to the cry of a rooster. Gerhard's wife understood the main thing. If the devil was waiting for the sign of morning, then that sign could be stolen from morning itself. She could not stop the stonecutters, could not break the bargain, could not erase the promise her husband had made. But she could strike at the condition on which the whole trap rested. And that is what makes her act so bold. Against the dark force, she did not bring a weapon, but cunning. This refers to the most tense hour of the first legend, The cathedral had already risen, its walls had climbed, its towers were reaching upward, yet the final point had still not been placed. The entire bargain had shrunk into a few moments before dawn. Somewhere nearby, the devil was working, certain that victory was almost in his hands, while in the shadows, a woman was waiting, ready to ruin his calculation. At the appointed time, she approached the cathedral. No solemn speeches, no city councils, no loud processions. Only night, stone, cold waiting, and a woman forced to save her family from someone else's pride. And then, she did something impossible in its simplicity. She cried like a rooster before the real morning arrived. That cry must have sounded to the devil like a slap across the face. He was waiting for a natural sign and received a deception made by a human voice. The construction had not yet been completed, the final tower had not yet stood as it was supposed to stand, and the condition had already worked against him. Too late to argue, too late to prove anything, too late to demand fairness from the one who had built the trap on deception. This refers to the climax of the whole first version. The devil was caught not by force, but by his own confidence. He thought he held people, deadlines, and stone in his hands. He believed he had frightened the architect, bound his family with a terrible promise, and almost taken the victory. But one woman struck where the dark force least expected a blow, at the precision of the condition, and then fury broke loose. According to the legend, the devil realized that he had not managed to place the final tower, and that unfinished instant became an insult to him. Before him stood an almost completed cathedral, an almost won bargain, an almost conquered city. But that very almost became his defeat. In stories like this, the devil does not leave silently, does not accept loss calmly, and does not close the book of the bargain with a polite smile. He began to smash the structure. The stone that had only recently risen upward with frightening speed became the target of his raging anger. What was supposed to prove his power suddenly became a monument to his failure. And in this scene, the whole cathedral seems to turn into a battlefield, not between armies, not between kings, but between human cunning and a dark force convinced of its own impunity. This refers to the moment when the legend finally turns Cologne Cathedral into something more than a church, a place of terrible fracture. Its beauty no longer looks innocent. Its incompletion no longer seems like an ordinary construction problem. Behind every stone, one question seems to rise. What exactly was broken that night, and why did the devil's fury, according to the tale, sink so deeply into the fate of this structure? After the deception with the rooster's cry, the legend could no longer end peacefully. The devil, robbed of victory at the final instant, did not simply retreat and did not merely leave the cathedral unfinished. According to the tale, he placed a curse on Cologne and on the structure itself, a curse cold enough to unsettle even the most sober mind. And at this point, the story stops being only a tale about the architect's wife and her cunning. It becomes a threat hanging over an entire city. From that moment on, anyone who tried to continue the construction seemed to step into someone else's war. Not an ordinary dispute about stone, money, and deadlines, but a collision with a force that had once been deceived and now demanded revenge. What arrogance, to complete what the dark power had declared to be its own defeat. After such a warning, could anyone calmly raise scaffolding, call in masters, and lay new stone as if nothing had happened? This refers to the darkest core of the legend. The cathedral became not merely unfinished, but forbidden. Its incompletion began to look not like human weakness, but like a condition of survival. As long as the final point was not placed, the city stood. As long as the final tower was not finished, the world continued to breathe. But if someone brought the work to its end, the old curse, according to the tale, would awaken. The devil seemed to leave behind, not ruined walls, but a terrifying instruction for future generations. Do you want to finish the cathedral? Then prepare for a blow. Do you want to place the final stone? then do not be surprised if the payment reaches beyond one family and one architect. In this version of the legend, Cologne Cathedral becomes a trap where greatness stands beside catastrophe and beauty survives on a frightening condition: do not complete it. That is why the whole story begins to sound like an accusation against human self-confidence. People again and again believe they can correct the past, close an old construction story, and declare victory over time. But the legend answers harshly and mercilessly: do not touch what once became part of a dark bargain. Do not place a full stop where that full stop may strike the entire world. This refers to the main fear that makes the curse so powerful. This is no longer about the architect's personal misfortune, and no longer about payment inside one family. The stakes rise suddenly to the limit. At the moment the final stone is laid, the apocalypse is supposed to begin. Not a fire in one tower, not the collapse of one wall, not the punishment of one master, but the end of the familiar order, a terrible final hour for everyone. That is why the legend of Cologne Cathedral holds so tightly. It takes an ordinary question: why did the construction drag on for so long? And turns it into a frightening verdict: because completion may be more dangerous than incompletion. The cathedral stands like a stone riddle, and every spire seems to ask, do people really need to finish everything they begin? Or can the final detail sometimes become not a victory, but a fatal mistake? What is especially unpleasant in this story is that the curse is aimed not only at the bold. It seems to cover the entire city, turning Cologne into a hostage of its own greatness. The townspeople wanted a cathedral that would glorify them for centuries, but received a legend in which the final stone is tied to the threat of the apocalypse. They wanted glory, they received fear. They wanted a cathedral higher than others, they received a question that is better not spoken aloud. This refers to the main provocation of the first legend. Perhaps the cathedral was not left unfinished because people could not complete it. Perhaps they were afraid to bring it to an end. And if the ancient curse was even partly alive in the city's memory, then every new master, every new ruler, and every new church official inevitably faced the same chilling question: what if the final stone truly must not be placed? But Cologne Cathedral has more than one dark legend, and that makes the story even more unpleasant. If everything rested only on the tail of the drawing, the rooster, and the curse, it could be dismissed as an old urban horror story. But another version grew around the cathedral, no less poisonous, no less defiant, and even more like an engineering duel with a dark force. According to this legend, Gerhard von Rile did not fail at the drawing stage at all. On the contrary, he successfully handled both the design and the construction. The cathedral was rising. Stone was placed upon stone, and the city saw its great dream turning into reality. It seemed like victory was near. The victory of the architect, the victory of skill, the victory of human calculation. But just before the work could be completed, the one who, according to the tale, was not content to simply watch from the side, appeared again. This refers to the second dark line of the story. Here, the devil does not come as a seller of a finished plan, but as a provocateur striking at the professional pride of the master. He does not offer rescue from disgrace, he offers a wager, and that is far more dangerous because a proud architect may refuse charity more easily than a challenge thrown directly in his face. The devil declared that he would not allow the construction to be completed so easily. What a filthy formula! The cathedral was almost ready. The city was waiting for the result. The architect's name was already close to glory. And then a force appeared and said, "First, let us play." Not pray, not negotiate, not check the drawings. Play a wager in which the stake was once again a human soul. The essence of the wager looked simple on the surface, but that simplicity hid the trap. The devil undertook to bring an underground channel to the cathedral. Not to raise a tower, not to carve stone, not to finish the facade, but to lay a hidden path beneath the earth. If he succeeded, Gerhard would have to give him his soul. Just like that, a great construction project suddenly became a dirty bargain, where an engineering task turned into a spiritual snare. This refers to the most treacherous turn of the second version. Here, the cathedral is no longer just a church, and not just a Gothic monument. It becomes a place where even underground water, channels, and technical secrets become part of a dangerous game. The devil seems to say to the architect, "You consider yourself a master of stone and calculation. Then let us see who knows the hidden laws of the earth better." According to the legend, Gerhard accepted the challenge, and in that decision, the same old human sickness can be heard again: self-confidence. He was certain the devil would fail, because laying such a channel required technical knowledge not known to everyone. The architect believed he possessed the secret without which the water would not flow properly, and therefore victory already seemed almost in his hands. But are legends of this kind built on calm human victory? No. They always lead to the moment when a clever man begins to believe he is cleverer than danger itself. Gerhard looked at the wager as a technical problem, while the devil, if the tale is to be believed, looked at him as prey. One saw a channel, the other saw a weakness. This refers to the main difference between the first and second legends. In the first version, the architect is trapped through despair and a ready-made drawing. In the second, he is trapped through pride, a wager, and confidence in his own professional superiority. But the final price remains just as terrifying: the soul of a man who came too close to greatness and decided he could dictate terms to a dark force. Gerhard von Rile was certain he held victory in his hands. He believed he knew the main secret of the underground channel, without which the devilish undertaking had to fall apart. This was not simply about digging a passage beneath the earth and bringing water to the cathedral. One had to understand how to create air vents, how to give water movement, how to make the channel work instead of turning it into a dead pit under stone walls. The architect thought this knowledge would save him. What dangerous confidence! He accepted the wager not because he had no fear, but because he trusted his own calculation too much. In his mind, everything looked simple. The devil could boast, threaten, and set traps, but without the technical secret, he would not be able to make the water flow properly. This refers to the fatal mistake of a clever man who confuses knowledge with safety. Gerhard was a master. He understood stone, plans, channels, and the movement of water. But he failed to understand the main thing. In a game like this, danger does not search for a weak point in the wall, but for a weak point inside the person. And that weak point turned out to be ordinary human trust. According to the legend, the architect shared the secret with his wife. Perhaps he did it out of anxiety, perhaps to lift the weight from his own mind, perhaps because beside her he could no longer remain silent. He told her about the secret of the air vents, without which water would not move through the channel. What could be so terrible about that? A conversation at home, a few words, an attempt to explain why he still hoped to win. But those very words became the blade with which he cut through his last protection. The devil, according to the tale, heard the conversation. He did not break down the door, did not demand a confession, did not tear the secret out by force. He simply overheard what Gerhard himself had carried from his mind into another person's ears. Just like that, a great engineering secret became prey. This refers to the most merciless turn of the second legend. The architect was not defeated by brute force. He was not crushed by an army, not broken by torture, not forced to sign a new bargain. He lost because of his own carelessness. And there is an especially bitter truth in this. Sometimes a person is ruined not by an enemy, but by one sentence spoken in the wrong place, at the wrong time. After that, the outcome of the wager was almost decided. the channel was built. What Gerhard had considered impossible without his knowledge was completed. The underground passage, the water, the air vents, the hidden work beneath the earth, everything came together against him with frightening precision. And once again, the cathedral was no longer just a construction site, but a place where human pride received the bill for its promises. One can imagine that moment. The architect sees the finished channel and understands that his calculation has collapsed. The city did not betray him, the craftsman did not fail him, the stone did not refuse to obey. He himself gave away what should have remained the final lock on the door. And now the door was open. The wager was lost. The price he had treated as a distant threat suddenly became real and unavoidable. This refers to the final blow of the second version. Gerhard faces not a mythical abstraction, but the consequences of his own decision. Yesterday, he was the architect of a great cathedral. Today, he became a man who understood that his mind, his experience, his pride, and his tongue had played against him. No beautiful victory, no triumph of skill, only the naked payment for self-confidence. According to the tale, when Gerhard saw the completed channel, he was seized by horror and threw himself down from the scaffolding. It sounds like the terrible final chord of the entire wager story. The great master, who wanted to defeat the devil with an engineering secret, was broken not by stone, but by his own miscalculation. And above all this stood the cathedral, cold, enormous, almost indifferent, as if it had known from the beginning that human pride rarely leaves such bargains without loss. So the second legend adds another dark layer to the story of Cologne Cathedral. There is no rooster's cry here, no broken deadline, no furious destruction at the final second. Everything is quieter here, and therefore more frightening. The secret is spoken aloud, the enemy hears it, the channel is built, the wager is lost, and the architect takes his final step from the height of the scaffolding. After that, even the most beautiful Gothic silhouette begins to look not like an ornament of the city, but like a stone witness to someone else's fatal mistake. One way or another, too many heavy questions remained around the name of Gerhard von Rile. The legend may argue with itself, the versions may differ, the details may change, but one thing sounds stubborn. The architect truly left this story under mysterious circumstances. And how convenient it would be to say that all of it is only a folk invention. Yet, near the cathedral, people still remember a strange underground channel, as if the earth itself keeps the trace of that very bargain. This is where the story becomes especially gripping. On one side, there is a dark tale about the devil, a wager, a drawing, and a fatal mistake. On the other side, there are real details that do not allow the legend to fall completely into dust. The underground channel connected with the cathedral sounds like an uncomfortable clue, not strict proof, but too expressive a trace to dismiss with a careless wave of the hand. This refers to the dangerous zone where an urban horror story begins to imitate a chronicle. People are told, do not believe in curses, do not believe in dark bargains, do not believe in white shadows near stone walls. But then the question appears, why has this story held on for so long? Why have the architect's name, the channel, and the incompletion of the cathedral been tied together for centuries into one disturbing knot? Gerhard seems not to have left his creation completely. In local tales, he turned into the guardian of his own stone design, a restless shadow beside the cathedral, a figure that appears not for beauty and not for cheap fear. Many claim they have seen the white shadow, the ghostly outline of the master who still walks near the church. And this is no longer just a detail for a gloomy legend, but almost an accusation. The cathedral stands, yet its past does not release the living. The white shadow is too powerful an image to be forgotten. Imagine the dark silhouette of the cathedral, the sharp towers, the stone rising into the sky, and beside it, a pale movement, as if memory itself has stepped out of the wall. Who is it? An unfortunate architect punished for his self-confidence, a guardian who does not allow dangerous construction to be completed, or a symbol of the very price that was allegedly almost paid for greatness? This refers to the main mystical trace of the whole story. The ghost here does not merely frighten passers-by. It seems to perform the work people could not finish, guarding the cathedral from the final step. It does not allow the last point to be placed. It does not allow incompletion to become final completion. And if the tale is to be believed, this is exactly why the feeling of prohibition lives so stubbornly around Cologne Cathedral. The thought itself sounds especially harsh. The architect could have become the creator of one of the greatest churches, yet he became its eternal prisoner. He wanted to leave glory behind, but left a question instead. He wanted to raise stone toward the sky, but became tied to the earth, to an underground channel, and to whispers near the walls. Such is history's grim bargain. The master's name did not disappear, but neither did the fear that followed it. And the deeper one looks into this legend, the more unpleasant its logic becomes. The underground channel recalls the wager. The architect's mysterious departure recalls the price. The white shadow recalls that the past is not closed, and the cathedral itself, enormous and cold, seems to stand between two worlds, official history and the dark tale that has been passed on in whispers for centuries. This refers to why Cologne Cathedral is perceived as more than a monument of architecture. Around it, an almost courtroom-like atmosphere has formed. There is a central figure, there are strange circumstances, there is a trace beneath the earth, and there are claims about a white shadow. And the main question still hangs over the city. If the spirit of its creator guards the cathedral, then from whom does he guard it? From people, or from what may happen after completion? Construction work continued until the middle of the 15th century, and that fact alone sounds like a blow to Cologne's beautiful dream. The city wanted greatness, the church wanted a sacred monument, and the masters wanted to leave behind a stone miracle. But instead of a confident final result, the story of the cathedral suddenly seemed to choke. The towers did not rise to the promised height, the design did not receive its final point, and the construction that was supposed to glorify the city stopped like a wounded giant. Officially, everything can be explained without mysticism. Europe was going through hard times, money disappeared, strength weakened, and people faced disasters that spared neither the rich nor the poor. Plague epidemics cut through cities, broke plans, and left empty houses, empty workshops, and empty markets behind. What kind of grand construction could continue when life itself had turned into a daily struggle for survival? This refers to the most convenient historical version. The cathedral was stopped, not by curses, but by reality. There was not enough money, not enough working hands, priorities changed, and Europe grew exhausted by upheavals. Stone could wait, but people could not. And if one looks at it dryly, without legends and night shadows, the halt in construction seems almost natural. But this halt fits the dark tradition too well. First, the legend says, "Do not complete the cathedral, or the curse will awaken." Then history suddenly shows that the construction really does freeze for centuries. Is this not exactly the case when official reasons sound reasonable, yet fail to remove the unpleasant question? Why did this particular church, conceived as a symbol of power, become tied to such a long silence of stone? The city could explain the delay through disasters, the treasury could point to expenses, and the church could wait for better times. But folk memory rarely settles for accounting answers. It wants a culprit, a sign, a prohibition, a frightening cause that is easier to fear than to debate. And that is why, beside plague, lack of money, and historical upheavals, another version continued to live. The cathedral was stopped by the curse. This refers to the double bottom of the story. On the surface, there is the 15th century, halted work, European disasters, and harsh reality. Beneath the surface, there is the old threat, devilish rage, and the final stone that apparently must not be touched. And the longer the cathedral stood unfinished, the more food the legend found for its grim growth. The unfinished church itself became evidence for those who wanted to believe in the prohibition. People looked at it and saw not merely a construction pause, but a stone sign. The cathedral was too great to be forgotten. The plan was too loud to accept failure silently. The pause lasted too long not to ask, what if the matter was truly not only plague and money? In this way, Cologne Cathedral became a place where history and mysticism began to work for each other. Historians may speak about crises, epidemics, politics, and finances. The legend answers in its icy voice. All of that is only the outer shell, while the real fear is hidden deeper. And while the construction stood still, while the stone remained silent, while the towers did not receive completion, the city lived beside a question that is not so easy to wave away. Was the cathedral stopped by circumstances, or did something too dark refuse to let people go further? In the 19th century, Cologne once again decided to play a dangerous game with the past. After centuries of halted work, the city, the authorities, and church circles seemed to say, enough fearing old stories, it is time to place the final point. The unfinished cathedral once again became the center of a loud plan, and that plan was presented almost as a victory of reason over superstition. But do legends of this scale disappear simply because officials sign a new decision? The work resumed, and around the cathedral, the great machine of human confidence began to move again. Stone, scaffolding, masters, calculations, ceremonies, promises. Everything looked as if the city had finally decided to tear its greatness out of the hands of a centuries-long pause. At the end of the century, grand celebrations were even held to mark the completion of the construction. It seemed that the solemn finale had arrived. Cologne had defeated time, fear, and the curse. This refers to the most defiant moment in the whole story. People decided to declare the cathedral complete, as if one ceremony could cancel centuries of disturbing traditions. The city wanted to see in this not merely the end of construction, but proof of its own strength. Ancient fears, they seemed to say, had been left behind. The stone had obeyed, the towers stood, the final point was placed. But very soon, after those loud words, new troubles began. The legend seemed to receive a fresh reason for a sinister smile. Not much time passed, and instead of a calm story about a completed church, reports of serious damage appeared. One of the towers collapsed, other problems followed, and the triumphant picture cracked sharply. How should this be understood? An ordinary engineering disaster, or an old warning that no one wanted to hear? This is where Cologne Cathedral again becomes an uncomfortable question. If the construction had been completed, why did damage appear almost immediately? If everything had been calculated, why did the stone fail? If the curse was only a horror story for the gullible, why did the story refuse to follow a calm path after the celebrations? Too many coincidences for one cathedral, too many strange blows after every attempt to place the final seal. This refers to the kind of details folk legends love most. The floors were still not fully completed, the glazing remained unfinished, and then serious problems with the foundation were discovered. The foundation, the lowest and most important part of the structure, the part on which everything else stands. Is it not symbolic that in a church tied to a legend of a dark bargain, anxiety returned precisely at the base? Official language could call this construction defects, structural fatigue, calculation errors, or the consequences of long interruptions. But the newspaper truth sounds harsher. The city celebrated victory too early. The cathedral seemed to allow people to hold a ceremony, accept congratulations, and pronounce beautiful words, only to remind them that its story could not be closed by order. Greatness turned out not to be a final point, but a new page of anxiety. For supporters of the curse, all of this looked almost like confirmation. No sooner had completion been announced than the blows returned. No sooner had people believed the past was defeated than damage, unfinished work, and foundation problems appeared again. This is how a particularly sticky fear is born. Perhaps the cathedral can be decorated, restored, strengthened and glorified, but never fully tamed. This refers to the main disturbing pattern. Every time people approach the word completed, history seemed to answer with new resistance. In the 15th century, the construction stopped. In the 19th century, people tried to close it ceremonially as a great project. And once again, instead of a calm finale, there appeared a cold list of problems that sounds almost like a mockery of human self-confidence. Cologne wanted to place a final point, but received an ellipsis made of stone, cracks, and unfinished meaning. It wanted a celebration, and received a new reason for rumors. It wanted to prove that the ancient legends had been broken, and instead received a story that only grew stronger. That is why the 19th century attempt looks not like a final victory over the curse, but like another round in the strange struggle between the city, the cathedral, and the shadow that had refused to leave for centuries. During the Second World War, Cologne received a blow after which many cities never rose in the same way again. Bombardments turned districts into piles of stone, streets lost their familiar outlines, houses vanished, and urban memory cracked along with the walls. Yet amid this destructive chaos, Cologne Cathedral almost survived. And does that not sound like another provocation in the story of a building surrounded for centuries by talk of a curse? The official explanation looks almost dry. The tall towers of the cathedral were used as a landmark. Pilots needed a visible point on the ground, and the Gothic giant rising above the city became too convenient a mark for navigation. In this way, a structure that legend claimed could not be fully completed became, during the war, something that helped people find their way in the sky. A strange role for a church that was meant to lead people to prayer, not to serve as a marker amid fire and smoke. This refers to the bitterest paradox of the story. The city around it suffered, the stone of houses collapsed, ordinary life fell apart, and the cathedral stood like a grim witness. Not fully untouched, not magically protected, but preserved enough to feed rumors once again. Why did this building remain standing when there were so many losses, cracks, and ashes around it? After the war, restoration was resumed. It would seem that everything should have been simple now. Restore it, strengthen it, close the old wounds, and return the cathedral to a worthy appearance. But the history of Cologne Cathedral, as always, refused to follow a simple path. The work did not become a short post-war task. It turned into a continuation of the same endless line, stretching from the 13th century through legends, pauses, ceremonies, collapses, and disturbing rumors. And this is where the ending becomes especially uncomfortable. The cathedral stands, people photograph it, admire it, and come to it as tourists and pilgrims. Yet beside all of that, one stubborn word still sounds: restoration. Not a final point, not a calm victory, not a peaceful, everything is finished, but the constant return of masters to the stone. As if the building demands attention again and again, not allowing people to close the book and say, "Now the story is over." This refers to the final nerve of the entire legend. Cologne Cathedral survived centuries, rulers, wars, construction pauses, and new attempts at completion. But it still seems to remain in a state of eternal tension. It can be repaired, strengthened, cleaned, and restored. Yet the very idea of a complete finale keeps slipping away like a shadow between the Gothic towers. And that is why the old tale of the curse never fully disappears. It clings to every pause, every crack, every new restoration effort. Reason says, this is how ancient structures work. They must be constantly maintained. The legend answers more harshly. The cathedral does not release those who try to place the final point. And it is precisely this argument that makes its story so persistent. Today, Cologne Cathedral looks like a victory of stone over time, but behind that victory, another, more troubling echo can be heard. It was built for too long, too many stories were told around it, and too often attempts at completion turned into new problems. And if one looks at it not as a postcard, but as a living chronicle of the city, it becomes clear. The main question has not been removed. What is it? The ordinary fate of a great monument, worn by centuries, war, and the need for endless care? Or is it still the trace of that old legend, where the final stone is more dangerous than any crack? The cathedral stands above Cologne, enormous, severe, beautiful, and dark. And its story seems to whisper, not every greatness can be completed without consequences. And now the question is yours. What was it really? An ordinary story of a great construction project, broken for centuries by wars, money, and human mistakes? Or does Cologne Cathedral truly keep, inside its stones, the trace of an old curse that people still do not like to speak about too loudly? Write in the comments what you believe, dry facts, or a legend that has survived for centuries. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss new stories from the archive of uncomfortable facts. And make sure to press the bell, because ahead are stories after which you will never look at familiar history the same way again.